This month, we have about 20 marriage-based green card interviews scheduled with USCIS. And these are all interviews that resulted from applications which were filed at the end of December and beginning of January in New York. We also have other applications pending around the country because we do these marriage-based green cards nationwide, but the processing times on those vary. So I'm just focusing on the New York ones. In the last 2 days, I attended 2 of the interviews with my clients because they were just panicking and they really wanted me to go, even though I tried to convince them that it's unnecessary and that they are prepared. But anyway, so I attended the interviews, and this video is going to be about what the interviews entailed, what questions were asked, what was the style of the officer. I know a lot of people ask me these questions, so I thought I would make a video specifically on this topic. When you attend a marriage-based adjustment of status interview with USCIS, you and your US citizen or permanent resident spouse must attend the interview together. This video actually focuses on when your spouse is a US citizen. When they're a permanent resident, it's not always clear that you can apply for adjustment of status, so don't take away from this video that, oh, I can apply for adjustment of status because my spouse is a permanent resident. Not always true. That's a complicated discussion that I've talked about in other videos where I go through the difference between preference category and immediate relative category immigration petitions. Okay, so you're attending the interview with your US citizen spouse. You check in with USCIS, whatever address your interview notice says. The ones I attended were at 26 Federal Plaza. It says 26 Federal Plaza 7-700. That means it's on the 7th floor, room 700. When you arrive, you have to check in at the window. Basically wait in line, and when you get to the window, you have to submit your interview appointment notice, and then they basically check you in. They will ask the green card applicant to provide their fingerprints using their left index finger on the fingerprint scanner and then their right index finger, and they'll also take a photograph of the applicant. They'll usually write a number on your interview notice and tell you to take a seat by like door 1 or door 2. The number we got yesterday was actually J7. So, and they didn't tell us exactly which door to sit next to. They said they'll just call it over the loudspeaker. We ended up waiting for around 2 hours before I asked to speak with a supervisor, because usually the interviews are done within 30 to 60 minutes of you checking in. Supervisor helped me address the issue, and it turns out the person who had signed us in hadn't done it properly. So they directed us to a different room on the same floor. It was room 108. And when we got there, within about 45 minutes, the USCIS officer asked us to follow her to attend the interview. So when we got to the interview room, it was probably like a 10 by 10 foot cubicle. The immigration officer asked me to take the far seat. There were basically 3 chairs right next to each other, and the immigration officer was across the desk from us. I sat in the far desk, the far chair, and then the middle chair was for the US citizen petitioner, and the chair closest to the door was for the immigrant spouse. The immigration officer asked us all for identification and then asked the petitioner and the beneficiary, the green card applicant, to stand up, raise their right hands, and to swear that everything they're gonna say is the truth. This specific ISO, or Immigration Service Officer, indicated that she wanted to start by determining that the marriage was in good faith. So that's the I-130 petition, and then would move on to the I-485, which is the green card application. 90% of the interview was to determine that the marriage was in good faith, and we'll talk about the exact questions. I actually wrote down all the questions she asked. She was going kind of quickly, so I did the best I could. So the first thing she asked for was for a copy of the lease agreement. We had already submitted like 3 years of lease agreements, but she had not looked at what we submitted, which actually is what happened the day before when I attended another immigration interview as well. I attended 2 in a row, like 2 days in a row. Neither of the officers had actually looked at any of the evidence that we had submitted. And if they had looked at the evidence, it would have really helped the interview proceed more quickly, because there was a ton of evidence that both of these marriages were in good faith. So she asked for a copy of the lease agreement. We indicated that it was already submitted, but we had brought a copy anyway, and my client just handed them right up. The officer was appreciative and then moved right into the questions. So she basically said, okay, these questions are for you, the US citizen petitioner, As I ask these questions, please do not look at your spouse. Do not nudge each other. Don't engage in like banter or small talk. Just please try to directly answer the questions so that we can get through this as quickly as possible. And so the first thing she did was ask, tell me about your spouse's parents. What are their names? And she knew the name of the spouse's mother, but not the father, because the father was not in the picture. He wasn't even listed on the spouse's birth certificate. The next question was, who are the people who attended your wedding ceremony? And so she answered the question. In this situation, there was like 29 people who attended. It was a small ceremony. And she even indicated that they had hit like the limit for the civil town ceremony. Then they asked, what is your spouse's best friend's name? Because right before she had mentioned that her spouse's best friend was in attendance at the wedding. So the immigration officer asked some questions about the spouse's friends to see what she could tell her. Next question, which I hadn't heard before, was how did you arrive at your wedding? And turns out that one of their parents had driven them to the wedding. So easy question, easy answer. I think the immigration officer was just looking for that deer in headlights look when you've been like caught, and nothing like that happened because it was a good faith marriage. So nothing to lie or hide about. By the way, there were several questions where neither spouse knew the answer and they just said, I don't know. And that's okay. The next question was, what is your apartment number? And after that, the immigration officer asked, when did you guys move in together? And how much is the rent? And at this point, the immigration officer actually started alternating between the spouses to ask the immigrant spouse some of these questions as well. But actually the majority of the questions were for the US citizen petitioner. And then after the immigration officer asked about the rent, she asked which utilities are included in the rent, what do you pay for separately aside from the rent? And then asked the immigrant spouse, what kind of car does your spouse drive? The next question was, do you share any joint bank accounts? If so, with which bank? Did you bring those bank account statements? And then we paused the questions for a second and handed up all the additional bank account statements from the last few months since we submitted the application. She wanted to see the updated statements and actually asked a few questions about the transactions that were on the statements. Who's in charge of paying for the optimum bill? Who's in charge of paying for rent? Who manages your bank account? Do you use your bank account for any other expenses? And asked the US citizen petitioner to just explain what the purpose of that bank account was, which expenses they pay for, because earlier in the interview, the US citizen petitioner had indicated that we really just use this bank account for joint expenses. Which insurance plan do you guys share? And then asked the immigrant spouse, how much does your US citizen petitioner pay each month for your health insurance? Because from the prior question, it became clear that the US citizen petitioner added the immigrant spouse on her employer's insurance plan. So asked the immigrant spouse, how much does your spouse pay each month towards your health insurance? And the answer was, I don't know, which is a reasonable answer. I wouldn't know that either. Right after that question, this was pretty quick, by the way. This whole thing took like 10 minutes. After that, the immigration officer said, okay, the I-130 portion of this is over. Now these questions are gonna be for the beneficiary, the immigrant spouse, just to make sure you're eligible for permanent residence. And then this actually happened during both of my interviews. The day before as well, the immigration officer divided it up clearly into an I-130 portion and then an I-485 portion. And the I-485 portions were almost identical for both interviews. The immigration officer basically just asked a few of the questions from the yes or no portion of the interview. So the first few questions on the yes or no portion, like, have you ever been denied a visa? Have you ever violated the terms or conditions of your non-immigrant status, which were for both of my spouses was yes. Have you ever worked without authorization? For both of them, it was yes. And so they asked the first like 5 questions from the yes or no section of the green card application, the I-485 application, and then they just kind of skipped around. Have you ever engaged in prostitution? Have you ever engaged in genocide? Like the ridiculous questions on the I-485 application. The officers didn't go through all of the questions, but they like randomly picked like 10 of them. And the answers to all of those were no. The only yes answers were, have you worked without authorization? Have you ever violated the terms or conditions of your non-immigrant status, which they both had overstayed tourist visas, so the answers to those were yes. And one of them actually answered yes to the question, have you ever been denied a visa before? Because he actually had to apply for a tourist visa multiple times before he got one to enter the United States. At the end of the interview, by the way, after the I-485 portion, the immigration officer made a couple notes and then asked the green card applicant to just sign an iPad saying like, are these changes or corrections accurate? And so they signed it, it was submitted, good to go. And then the immigration officer handed them this notice, which says, notice of interview results. You have just completed your interview. USCIS is unable to complete your case at this time. Your case is being continued until a final decision can be made. Please see below for further explanation. And then there's a box checked under the reason for continuance section that says your case is being held for review. At this time, USCIS does not require any further information or documents from you. Should further information or documents be required, you will receive a notice in the mail. We may also schedule you for another interview. You will receive a notice in the mail. Otherwise, a final decision will be mailed once your case is complete. So all of my cases who attended interviews in the last few days received this notice, and all of them 24 hours later logged into their USCIS case status portal and saw that the I-130s and I-485s were approved. So it's quite normal at the end of the interview for the immigration officer to say, we can't give you a final decision right now. In both cases, I asked the officer, how did they do? How did my clients do while we were walking out in the hallway? And in both cases, they said they did good or they did fine. So don't panic if the immigration officer gives you a notice saying a final decision cannot be made. That actually probably happens to 80 or 90% of applicants. They just need a little bit of time to review your application and make sure all the paperwork's in, your medical exam is good, your I-94 shows a legal entry into the United States, and they probably check a few other things that I don't even know about. But within 24 hours, both applications got approved. There's one final note I'd like to make before I close out this video. I don't think it's really that important for most people to have an immigration attorney attend the interview. The two clients with whom I attended interviews this week were really nervous. They had some life circumstances that just made them really nervous about immigration changes. And so they wanted me to attend the interviews, and they know I do a lot of marriage-based green card applications. And really, they knew I didn't need to go, but they just wanted to feel more comfortable. If the immigration officer did anything inappropriate, they wanted me to be there to request to speak with the supervisor, since I know how the interview is supposed to go. In both cases, they probably wasted their money by hiring me to attend the interview, and I told them that in advance. What I think is very important is to prepare with your attorney before you attend the interview. The main thing that I do with people before an interview is create a list of every document that they need to bring to the interview and prepare how to answer questions that you don't know the answer to. How to say, I don't know, or I don't remember, or I don't understand the question. How do you say that in a way that's not going to create problems? That's basically what I practice with people. To be honest, in most cases, interview prep takes 45 minutes or less, and people are good to go. So just keep that in mind before you pay like an exorbitant fee for an immigration attorney to attend your interview. Now, with that said, if your case is not straightforward, if you did not enter with like a standard I-94 record of entry, if you have any severe criminal history that might be problematic, or anything else that's out of the ordinary, speak with an attorney to determine whether or not it's a good idea for them to attend with you, and hopefully they're honest enough to give you a legitimate answer. If you're going through the marriage-based green card process yourself and you need an attorney to assist you or to prepare with you before the interview, you could always schedule a consultation with me. My name is Puyan Darian. I'm an immigration attorney. I focus on marriage-based green cards throughout the entire United States. It's not just limited to New York. So if you want someone who can handle the whole process from start to finish, I'm your guy. You can find my information in the video description below, and I'll see you guys next time for another video.